Hello and welcome to the Game Mess Game Club, where this month we are talking about the game we all played during December, which is Strider, the 2014 version of the Capcom action game. This is Mike Minotti from Game Mess. I am joined by my friends here who have all gathered to talk about this Metroidvania with me. This is an interesting one. I actually got to pick all three games that we voted for in December because it's my birthday month and I'm a special boy. So I picked a lot of things on my backlog, and I've always heard good things about this Strider that people don't talk about very much. Everybody seems to be a little confused that Capcom made a Metroidvania reimagining of one of their kind of mid-tier franchises. People don't talk about it a lot, but the people who do talk about it like it quite a bit. So I guess my first question for people is, how aware were you of this game before we played it for the game club? Go ahead, Randy.
I was a giant Bomb fan, and they covered it a lot, so I was aware of it. I actually had it. I somehow acquired it, probably through some kind of Humble Bundle or something. Never touched it until this, though.
I think this is a game for a lot of people. Like, that's one reason why I put it on. I had it in my Steam library. I was like, well, I have this. Probably got it from some Capcom bundle. People say it's good. So, yeah, I guess I may as well go and play it. I don't know if anybody else has anything to say about what they knew about this going in. Or I'm also curious to hear how you feel about Metroidvanias in general. Go ahead, Villain.
I know nothing about Strider of any sorts.
So I was first introduced to Strider actually because of Marvel vs. Capcom, because he's the playable character in there. And even then, I was like, who's Strider? Which is weird because I was a Genesis guy. Somehow I completely missed that game on Genesis, and I think that's where the best version of Strider was. So Strider was an arcade 2D action side scroller where you're a ninja. It had a good Genesis port. They made an NES game, which is nothing like the arcade original, but kind of neat in its own way. And then there's a couple other games. The other big one was Strider 2 for PlayStation 1 that people also talk about as kind of a hidden gem that I might need to play sometime. Shawn, what did you want to bring up?
So I was surrounded by this game when it came out. I'm a big Capcom fan. I guess you could say I was a Double Helix fan at the time because I love Killer Instinct. Also, I'm a big Maximilian Dood fan, and he is a giant Strider fan. And the fact that he worked with Double Helix on some stuff when this game was being made, he was promoting the hell out of it. So that was definitely like all over all of my feeds and everything. So I was very aware of this game's existence when it came out. I actually don't know if I'm the only one here. I did play it to a degree when it came out. Bounced off it a little bit. It wasn't what I wanted at the time. And I hadn't really come back to it until now. To answer part two, though, the other question you asked, interestingly, this game sort of reinforced it for me after playing. As much as I love Metroid, I think I've talked to you about this, Mike. I think I'm just not a Metroidvania guy overall. I think I just like the Metroid formula because I'm not a huge Metroid formula Castlevania fan either. As good as those games are, like Symphony of Night, incredibly made game, it never clicked with me in the way that the Metroid games do. So it was interesting going into this one, being a Capcom fan, being interested in what this game would be, especially because of who it was made by, despite the formula not really being my cup of tea generally.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I'm definitely a Metroidvania guy. Like, this is probably one of my three favorite genres. So it's always fun to explore a new one. Matt, you go ahead.
Yeah, I definitely had this when it first came out. I picked it up. It was during when Xbox Live was doing their Summer of Live things. It was one of the later Summer of Lives, but I remember I was always big into getting those, so I picked it up then and played through it at that point. I enjoyed it. I also was a Genesis kid, so I played through Strider on there as well because I had that. But I think this is a pretty good, I guess, sequel to the Genesis version. This. Just the straight arcade style, go from point to point, instead of this where you have the Metroidvania part where you're having to go back and forth and do that type of stuff. So I don't know. I enjoyed it.
Beef, go ahead.
All right. And then for me, this is actually also, I guess I'm the other one else with Matt who's played this one before. I didn't get it launched, but I got it years ago. And even back then, like, yeah, you could pick it up for like $3. So, which is weird because, yeah, like, that's still what you can get for it. It's been cheap for so long. I don't remember why I picked it up. I think there was maybe just a review of someone who, like, highly recommended it. And I've also always loved Metroidvanias. So, obviously, I'll talk about more of how I felt about it. But yeah, this is my second time going through it.
Yes, exactly. So, yeah, man, it is weird. You wonder, like, how well did this? It probably didn't do very well, and probably why it's so cheap and easy to get now. A lot of people didn't know it happened. It was basically double Helix's last game, which is a really big shame too, for sure. But hearing about this, I was super interested in it. Again, I love Metroidvanias like Super Metroid, Symphony of the Night, Ori, Hollow Knight. Those are like some of my favorite games ever. So the idea of like playing some hidden Metroidvania gems is always exciting, even if sometimes like those games don't necessarily hit as much as I want them to. But this one worked pretty well for me. I like this quite a lot, and I guess the weird thing to me was how much it actually reminded me of Metroid Dread, which is similar in terms of being a 2D Metroidvania that uses actually 3D graphics and 3D models and everything. It still just feels really good to control, and I guess that's kind of my first point here is just the controls and how smooth it really feels. For that's such an important thing with these games, the 2D movement, and that worked really well for me. Shawn, do you have thoughts along those lines or something else you wanted to bring up?
Well, first I wanted to answer your thought there. It at some point was added to Capcom's Platinum titles list, so it has sold over 1 million titles. We don't know when it would have hit that, but at some point it did cross that number. So it sold, but I'm assuming that's accounting for all sales and everything over time. So we don't really know how quickly it arrived to that number. But yeah, on the controls, you were talking about the fluidity of the game. And that's the thing that definitely stands out to me as being probably the best thing about this game is that I have some gripes with it in other areas, but the game at least always feels good to control. Like Strider he moves pretty well for like a 2.5D character. The sword slashing always feels good. My biggest issue is I wish you could play with a D-pad instead of needing to use the analog stick, because there were definitely times when I wanted to do, say, something strictly diagonal, like throwing a kunai, and I couldn't quite get the direction that I wanted. Which
maybe if you played your fighting games with the analog stick like I do, you'd be better at using those diagonal.
This freaking guy.
Yeah.
The one thing that I did have a problem with in terms of movement and related to that is the hook. The hook they used to climb things. It's a good idea, but it felt a little awkwardly sticky at sometimes. I definitely prefer like the Metroid series version of this with the spider ball, where you just, you hold a button and then you move along a track, and then when you release the button, Samus will drop. With Strider, I definitely felt that I was getting caught on things sometimes when I didn't want to. Like I would be trying to avoid an enemy attack, and I just couldn't because Strider was like, "Nah, I want to hook onto this thing above me. I'm trying to like position him off of it." But the inverse happened as well, where I would be trying to like get him onto something, and he wouldn't quite want to stick for whatever reason. So the controls felt a little awkward in that regard. Otherwise,
was that part fixed for you a bit when you got that kind of like dash thing, which again really gave me Metroid Dread vibes?
Yes, once you get the dash, I was relying on that so much because Hiryu will pause in the air and then you can position him however you want. You got like a whole like 3 seconds before he starts dropping.
Feels good to use too.
It feels very good to use, yes, but it's a little unfortunate that I had to rely on that, I think, but that did, you're right, that did fix things, so to speak, eventually.
Randy, you have something to say on the controls front?
Yeah, well, that dash, it gave me a lot of Ori vibes, too. There's just like dash against the projectiles and stuff like that. Very similar. Yeah, I thought this game felt really good for the most part. I agree with basically everything Shawn said. I too am a D-pad person, so that took me some time to get over, but I did get over it. I did get over the clinging to the walls thing, and I thought that ended up being more of a positive than a negative. I actually liked that mechanic quite a bit, especially figuring out how to traverse past the obstacles in some ways. I thought that was a fun way to navigate around the world. I got two kind of complaints with the game as a whole. Overall, I did like it. I think it's pretty good. I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more when it first came out, but now we've been spoiled with this kind of game, sort of. So like I'm not as hungry for it, but I still enjoyed it. My issues really, I think the difficulty, I don't even want to say difficulty, just kind of throw enemies at you arbitrarily. There's just a ton of enemies on screen at all times. It doesn't kind of feel like there's a rhyme or reason for it per se. You're just kind of slashing like mad, and it doesn't feel like there was a vision about where to put this person in a fun way or anything like that. And I kind of feel the same way about the level design. It's Metroidvania kind of in spirit, but not necessarily in execution. I kind of went through it pretty straight and narrow. There was a couple divergent paths that led to a couple upgrades, but it didn't feel extremely necessary, like something like a Hollow Knight where I feel I really got lost or immersed in the world. This just kind of felt like an action game where I could go off the beaten path every once in a while. So it didn't really scratch that itch in a way I was hoping, but the promise is there, and I think a lot of the mechanics are incredible. I thought it was a lot of fun to play.
The last point you brought up is interesting because it's something I thought about too, and I think maybe, I don't know if it's a strength necessarily, but I think I enjoyed it about it, how it is almost like this classic Strider game, right? That just happens to be set in this Metroidvania map. And there is this kind of linear critical path. And it's even much easier to follow that than in a normal Metroidvania, because you have the mini map, but like your icon is a compass at all times, telling you which way to go. So it's very easy to just sort of follow this critical path and slash your way over there and just kind of play it almost as this kind of linear action game. But at any point, if you want to, yeah, sure, you can go and explore and find some of these hidden collectibles or find some upgrades, and is that super necessary? Or if you want to, maybe it could be almost more like something like The Messenger, where it doesn't literally become Metroidvania till the end. You can almost treat this like that, like before final boss or even after that. Well, now I want to 100% it, and now it becomes more this, exploratory, go around the world, search for things. But I don't know, it's kind of like a neat, especially given the legacy of this franchise being more of a level-based just action game. It's interesting that it kind of does play like that, despite being a Metroidvania. Matt, go ahead. What did you want to bring up?
Yeah, that actually was pretty similar to what I was originally going to say. I was going to say that like it really has that feel of, also with like random guys everywhere. Like that's just very much, it's the arcade. It's building on that arcade legacy, and it wasn't like trying. I feel like it wasn't trying to do like, oh, I'm trying to really think about this. It's like, I still want you to have that arcade feel, because the whole point of Strider is you have big sword that cut bullet. And you just swing it like crazy. You just never wanted to stop swinging that sword because it looked so good. That was it. That's all you ever did when you were playing the old Genesis and the arcade game back then. And so I think they kind of wanted you to have that same feel where you're like, yeah, don't stop swinging that sword. Just keep going.
Right, and swinging that sword felt so good in that original game. It still feels really good here, and I like how similar the vibe is to that, like that base action of like throwing that sword and even doing like the slide and that jump where he does a little cartwheel. Like that totally just feels like you're playing that original game again. Shawn, go ahead.
I wanted to springboard off of something that Randy said regarding like the combat, which is it's probably my biggest problem with this game is, like he said, how they sort of just throw enemies at you. I got really frustrated. Well, the combat in general frustrated me a lot. Like the exploration, as minimal as it was, like the movement and everything felt very good. But the second you get into combat, especially early on, it feels a little overwhelming, almost a little bullet hell, where the game is more about dodging things than it is actually sort of a dance with your opponents, which I think is what good melee combat games should be. This is especially evident early on. This was the thing where I was like straight up getting frustrated at. I streamed the first like few hours of this game, and I think the chat was noticing that, yeah, okay, this seems a little BS. It seems like you're designed to just tank the bullets to the face at first, since you get the deflect upgrade, but that's way later on. Well, you know, way later on in a 5-hour game. But at least for this first first couple hours, you can't really do much about the bullets. They're almost just like a deterrent from you approaching an enemy. And it's especially annoying when you have, say, a cannon, where a cannon shot will straight up put you in hit stun. And there's a lot of things in this game where you will just be put into hit stun and you literally can't do anything. And I found it very frustrating. Even when you get the deflect, it's not like you can just deflect the bullets willy-nilly. You do have to do a very specific timing to deflect them back. And I think it almost feels like a QA issue. Because if you notice when you're playing the game, there's very much those health pickups all over the place. Like, the enemies don't drop a lot of health when you take them out, but boy, are those health pickups everywhere. I feel like that was almost a response late in development, where some QA person was like, oh no, this is kind of BS. I'm coming out of every combat scenario just like taking hits to the face, and they were like, all right, just slap health pickups everywhere. And to give you a little bit of history here as to why, what I think might have happened with this. This game, I couldn't like dig up any actual like dirt on this, but just like following sort of a chain of events from secondhand stories I've heard. Like I mentioned, like Maximilian was big into this game because he's a huge Capcom Strider fan, etc. I think this game was made in like a year or less total, because originally there was going to be a different developer on this, and then they fizzled out. Stuff happened there. The double helix version of this game came out, I think, in a year or less while they were working on Killer Instinct, which already was a crunch project. So I think there are certain elements of this game that sort of slip through the cracks a bit, which is less noticeable when you keep in mind what it is. It, despite being published by Capcom, despite being one of their IP, it's definitely one of those 360 era indie revivals of one of these franchises. And I feel like maybe
Xbox One era, technically.
Well, cross-gen, if we want.
Cross-gen, baby. Yeah. 2014, let's go.
Yeah, I know how, now Jeff's here, he can yell at me about what the cross-gen period is.
You dumb bitch.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Jeff, tell him to get good now next.
Yeah, get good. I didn't have that much problem with I wasn't coming out of combat. that hurt. I don't know. I guess I get.
You also played what, like 2 hours?
I just got the deflect upgrade, so that's like I just got it because I just found my Steam Deck. Yeah, it's I get what you're saying though. You're absolutely right about the health pickups being there everywhere as sort of a response to what's happening in the combat. But you know, the combat still mostly just feels fun, and it feels like that dance you were mentioning. It's not super refined, but it is definitely, I think, most of the time kinetic, and it makes you feel like you're engaged. You quickly learn the patterns and the sort of the timing of the attacks of the enemies and how to mostly dodge them. And then when you do get hit, it's not a ton of damage. As long as you're taking a bullet here and there. If you take like a full barrage of hits from like one of those turrets that can do 4 or 5 major bullets, yeah, that's gonna leave you hurting something fierce. But usually you can get pretty skilled at avoiding that stuff. Now, I can still tell there's some rough edges around along the phrase of this game where they were figuring stuff out. I just think most of their choices were pretty good. I think this is a game that understood what it was going for. I think they understood what makes Strider cool, and they leaned into that for the most part. I think a game like this coming out today would be better in every conceivable way, for sure. But I'm looking back at the critical reception at the time. I'm like, oh man, this is one of those ones where it's like it's so much easier to feel more favorable about this now. It's like a lost sort of hidden gem than most people felt at the time. And even then, they were giving it 7s and 8s. It's definitely a 2014 7 or 8 game though. But with a little bit of extra shine on it now that we're kind of coming back to it, and it's like, oh, we didn't get a ton of these games, so it's awesome to go back, see this, have that sort of connection to whether it's deliberate or not, to Metroid Dread, and be like, oh yeah, there is a lot of stuff here that feels very Metroid Dready. This boss flies around just like that one boss in Metroid Dread and all that stuff. So it's I'm getting a little bit of nostalgia from that, but but it's a game that I'm very happy that got picked here, because it's happy. I'm like, oh, this is one I would have been really sad had I never played before, and I'm like glad that I finally got around to it.
I want to add one thing real quick, just because of something that Jeff mentioned. Something that you wouldn't have seen until you get to the late game. There's some real BS stuff here where they definitely didn't think it through. Like I was saying with the hit stun thing. For example, one of the late game bosses has this attack where he fires out very Ikaruga bullets that you need to dodge. But the problem is the bullets are multiplicative. And you have no iframes. And so this is a melee-based game where if you're standing next to him and he decides to do that attack, you literally die instantly because every single bullet does its full damage to you.
Well, you don't stand next to him then.
But again, it's a melee-focused game.
I mean, okay, doesn't mean you can be next to him the entire time. You use your... Plus, doesn't Option B help protect you a little bit?
No, Ouroboros doesn't do any protection. It just adds bullets to your attacks.
I think it has some... No, it has protection aspects.
There is a protection ability as well. Yes. But beyond that, I'm kind of with...
Shawn.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't mean to throw you under the bus, Shawn. You're right. I still agree with you, though, is that there is points of this game that do feel quite a bit unpolished, but in some ways it works in its favor a little bit, because there are times where I feel like I am getting skunked just walking through these hallways and getting blasted and knocked around, and then I get an upgrade and go through that same hallway and I'm just melting fools and shrugging everything that comes up. That feels good to me, and I kind of like that as oh man, this hallway gave me a whole lot of trouble the first time around, and now I'm back and I am liquid death. I am revenging myself. Friend. Exactly. Yes, I'd throw that thing out there and I just sprint right through. It's awesome. I think the dance, for me, this game clicks for me in two ways, and one is just the navigation upgrades. I really like the dash, and just all of the upgrades that you get to traverse the environment I really enjoyed using. And I also think some, not all of them, but the boss fights, I think that's where the dance comes in, where they kind of, Shawn says you shouldn't stand next to him. Well, you got to stand next to him, but that's the risk. That's the design. You got to get in there, you got to get your hits, and you got to get out. And if you don't,
dare I say the Dark Souls of Metroidvania?
Yes, I definitely was trying to get my damage in and then get out. I was definitely thinking Dark Souls.
I didn't want to be the one to make that comparison, but I definitely felt that way, and I do not like Souls games because I don't like games where something will come out of nowhere that you can predict it. I don't like that old school game design philosophy of, well, you need to learn the pattern because this goes all the way back to arcade roots where, no, we're going to take your quarter here. Is it unfair?
Oh, I love it.
We don't care.
I love learning.
I know some people do. Yeah, you guys do.
So, but here's
the
thing. Punch Out so much. You Punch Out and Metroid Dread bosses. Yep. Yeah. And
no. Do not compare those, because you can react in those games. This game definitely has stuff where you cannot react to things. Well, yeah. I mean, if you're good.
I mean, within reason. I feel like there's some
react to. There's tells, and there's tells here too.
I've definitely I ended up one-shotting some bosses. Here's the thing, though. If you, I one-shot most. If you're paying attention to kind of I'm not throwing you under the bus again, Shawn. I still agree with you in a lot of ways. If you're kind of clicking with the game as you're playing through it, by the time you get to the bosses, you're kind of knowing what to expect. You're okay, I know that I'm looking for a pattern. And so I kind of keep my distance a little bit, waiting to see what they do. Okay, obviously this person's going to shoot up in the air and then put projectiles here. And a lot of times they are telegraphed. They'll have little bubbles on the ground. And obviously don't stand there. My favorite thing, and this is probably not intentional, but I love it. When you press that button, that sword swings. There is no... it is going to swing no matter how many times you press that button. And for those bosses... I walked in there and I'm like, I'm going to do the thing where I intentionally tense my arms so hard that I am firing this button as fast as humanly possible. And I melted those bosses like it was nothing. So I would dodge. And then the second I got my opportunity, I would go, and they would be down in like 1 or 2 rounds. And that was amazing.
It's something the original Strider did good. It is like just one of the best feeling attacks to spam in a video game ever, right? I don't know why. The sound is great on it. It is so fast, and you can just keep smashing that. Like I almost am wondering, man, I wish I had a turbo button just to see what it can look like there.
It is the iconic Strider thing of the shing shing, like that's, and they make it very prominent in the Marvel vs.
It's well animated
and everything. Yeah,
and for me,
that sword swing is so huge. It's
especially when you charge or you have rage mode. Yeah.
All right, order. I'm going to call on some people here. I'm going to call on Matt.
Hang on.
Oh, you talk to what, Shawn?
Hang on. Just before we lose the train here, I want to just like one last thing to clarify what I was saying. Yeah, exactly. But what Randy was saying was that he thought it was a little uneven. That's where I'm coming from here, because I didn't think this was a problem the whole way through. Like, to be clear, I think some things in this game are unfair, and there were certain bosses where it was like, well, I think the snake is called Ouroboros, right? Like, and that's why you get the weapon. But the Mark II fight where he gets the ice, there was so many times in that fight where I was just thinking to myself, this is kind of BS. Because, like, for example, the primary way you're supposed to fight that boss is just using option C, the eagle. And the game explicitly tells you as much. And I was just thinking to myself, I'm not really having fun with this fight because there's no player expression here.
It wasn't a great boss fight either. Yeah. But
and there were a few of those. Exactly. And that's why I felt kind of uneven, because then there are other ones where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just wailing on the button and just plowing through it. So I wish it was just a little more even is my frustration with the combat. That's all.
All right, Matt, did you want to jump back in there?
I basically just wanted to say that the sword arc is so large that it makes me happy every time I swing it. It feels so good. That was it.
Big boy. Beef, how about you?
I want to say I am here to throw Shawn under the bus because I disagree with him.
Yeah, give that.
Thanks, bro.
Yeah, no problem. But seriously, actually, one point I think Randy was making at like it is an instant tap and that you can like mash the X. Well, I learned because I was like, I wonder if you could like speedrun this game. It is instant. You can do it up to like 20 times a second in speedrunners. So speedrunners will mash on the controller and the keyboard, and you can do about 20 times a second. And
that rules.
It melts like in like 3 seconds. You would take down a boss, and I was like, they're all like, yeah. So your arm's gonna be hurting by the end of this thing. I was trying as fast as I can to just see how. And yeah, it feels so good just to do that.
It was that game done quick. If you ever want to go back and watch that.
Ooh, I have to watch that.
So I think you're all getting the idea here that I did really like this game. It is very much a Mikey kind of game. This just really fast-paced 2D action game with good movement, and it's a Metroidvania. Again, my thing. So I will talk about the thing I didn't like. And there wasn't much story here, but it was always bad and annoying, and the talking heads was driving me insane, especially when it was just some Russian guy, and it was even looping the talking head. Like, he kept repeating the thing, and I was like, what is this? It's not saying anything important. It's not adding any flavor. It's literally just blocking the bottom part of the screen and sometimes I like cheesy, over-the-top voice acting. It's like they just brought people in, and like, there's going to be no restraint here. Like, you're an evil scientist. You're going to do the most ridiculous evil scientist voice that anybody has ever conceived in the history of video games. And that sounds like it would be fun. And it's actually so over the top that it's kind of pathetic is strong, but it's pathetic adjacent. Randy, was that something that bothered you?
Oh my, yes. It's one thing when you can ignore the story and just skip the cutscenes and get straight to the game. This was actively harmful. It was in the way. It was a speech bubble. I searched the options for a way to turn it off because they kept looping the same line over and over again, getting in my way. It was causing me to get hit when I otherwise wouldn't. You want to talk about something that's not fair? So I don't see words when people speak them in real life. That's not fair. They shouldn't be blocking my vision. When I turn the radio on when I'm driving, it's not like the subtitles are going up over my windshield. It's kind of messed up. I did not care for it at all. And like you said, extremely over the top in a kind of a bad way, not a fun way. There's really nothing there to speak of. It kind of just, if it was there and you could skip it and get it out of the way, fine. But the fact that it just shoves it down your throat, a lot of the optional side stuff that you were saying, Mike, you enjoyed, you would run into like these story logs, and I'm like, come on, like I don't want to risk my life for going down this optional path to get one of these things that don't matter. And there was a lot of stuff that I was getting that just didn't matter. And that's kind of where my Metroidvania issues came from. It would, if it was a meaningful upgrade, yeah, sure. But I felt like I was getting, concept art and stuff constantly that I just didn't want. So
yeah, it was like disappointing. I feel like you're going this out of the way path and you're doing this tricky thing, and it's like, oh, you unlocked concept art. No, great, fantastic. And it's like this is like going to the story though. Like this is a game that just absolutely didn't need any of that. Like the original Strider, there's not like cutscenes or talking heads. It's so obvious what's going on. You're a ninja. You're gonna get these people, and that could have just been conveyed just as easily here without having the unnecessary talking heads. And like there aren't that many cutscenes, but every time it's stupid. Like even when you have to convey something, like you need to get 3 of these things to open up this door, you could just show that by showing those 3 things. It's obvious what that's representing. Jeff, I'm curious to know if this bothered you, because it seems like something that would bother you.
I when I get to an actual cutscene, that does bother me. But I'm playing on the Steam Deck, and usually I'm playing when there's a lot of other stuff going around in my life. So the talking heads popping up, it's like, I'm like, what is going on there? Because I'm not even really listening to what they're saying. I'm just kind of enjoying the combat and running around. So I've mostly been able to ignore that. But it's clear that they were just, a lot of this stuff was an afterthought. When I did begin to notice the talking heads popping up and looping, the Russian guy specifically, I was like, okay, that's pretty cheesy. Like let's not do that. At a certain point, we've heard all the lines. Why? They must just not have had the time to realize like this is more annoying than it is anything else. And had they had the time to like really refine the game, they clearly would not have done that. Like you play all the lines once, fine, then you move on. But looping them, just for what purpose? Like you think people are getting like that much of a kick out of it? Of course, they aren't.
It's weird.
You know they aren't. So, but mostly I've been able to ignore it. Now I am starting to get to some cutscenes. I just got to the guy in the prison cell talking about the black marketer.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Yeah, okay, I get it, but I am looking for the button to skip this. So that's where I'm at with that stuff.
Shawn, do you have something you want to add there?
Yeah, this story stuff is a bit of the time, because one of my favorite indie action series, Azure Striker Gunvolt, they do the same thing. But at least in there,
anime.
Exactly. But at least in there, you've always been able to turn it off. And even in the most recent one, in 3, which came out last year, you can even set the transparency of it in case you do want it on. So that way it's not, hogging screen real estate. Because like you guys were saying, having a constant like lower third anytime they want to do story, I almost would have preferred just a cutscene. But then again, I say that, I'm like, but wait, you can't skip the cutscenes in this game unless it's retrying a boss fight. So maybe that wouldn't have been better, because the story, like you guys were saying, is bad. It's so bad. We didn't need it. The voice acting is low budget, shall we say. And it was just, not necessary at all, and only just got in the way most of the time. So it is a bit of a bummer, especially because it's nonsense. Like, it's all MacGuffins. Like, oh, you need to unlock this door. Go to Rat Dude in the sewer. He'll sell you the key or whatever. It's like,
and all you need is the Super Metroid thing where you get to the thing and then it's like, all right, now go here, and it like shows you on the map. That's all I need. Like, I obviously I need understand so much of Metroidvania. You need to like send me somewhere new in the map to go to, but I don't want to like hear a discussion about it.
It does like really put Metroid Dread in such a good light of like, oh my god, the restraint they must have had making that game. Where they're like, here is one line of dialogue from Samus Aran.
You have Adam talking sometimes, not very much, and it's fine.
Right, and it's just so judicious, and it's really well done.
Yeah. Beef, did you want to add something?
Yeah. Because like I said, I've played this twice. Both times, I just drop out of like caring about the story so fast. I have no idea what the heck is going on. I've always like meant to look up and see what is even going on. And the weird thing I wanted to mention is I've also, after this game, I was checking out Evil West, which is also a game where it's like mostly carried by just amazing gameplay. But I was like, at least in this game, it's kind of like almost hilarious how the story's like, well, cowboys going after vampires. So it keeps me, interested, or at least it's a really good setting. And my other problem with this game is like just the setting doesn't really do anything for me. It doesn't help at all. None of the story does anything because I just stopped caring. So, but that's why I'm like, thank goodness this game is only like 5 hours because it doesn't matter. I'm just here for the gameplay.
I like the time of it a lot, and I think I beat it a bit on the faster end at 3.5 hours. I've seen 4 or 5. But it's just it really is breezy. MILF Island, who wasn't able to join us live, also a great name, MILF Island. Wrote this in on our kind of tech submissions. Said I haven't beaten at the time of this recording, 4 hours in, but I like to point out that I really miss games of this scale. Something that sits nicely between indie and AAA. Also, that ninja weapon is cool as fudge. See, I think the scale actually is a big selling point for me here. I like how relatively breezy this is. I beat it in 2 playthroughs. Was able to go pretty fast pace, and again, because in some ways, it's a bit of a bummer that there aren't a lot of great upgrades to get by going on your own, but it also means you don't need a lot of upgrades to beat the game. Like, especially if you're doing like one of the Castlevania ones or one of these Metroidvanias that's a lot more RPG-y, you really do need to go and grind, or you really need to go and find a lot of upgrades just so that you're really strong enough to kind of get to the end. And that's not really an issue here. You can just follow that critical path for the most part. You're going to even get enough health upgrades so that you're probably going to be fine. Chronobound says, overall, I liked the 5 exclusively Steam Deck hours I put into the game. For better or for worse, it constantly reminded me both of Shadow Complex and 2009's Bionic Commando. All 3 would, in my opinion, be improved by just having all of the story removed, as they aren't good. The moment-to-moment movement, interaction, and navigation are where these games shone brightest. Specifically for Strider, the visuals are rough. Many enemy attacks, what isn't platformable, and occasional dead ends and invisible walls are all frustrating visual reads with the excessive bloom effect dripping off the Steam Deck screen. I did find out you could turn off the bloom effects, by the way. Having more upgrades be more substantial instead of the small numerical increments they really were would be a great improvement. By the time Old Strider was above the city, I was already over half an hour into thinking it was slightly overstaying its welcome. There's to say it was an enjoyable if flawed Castleroid game, and there are worse ways to spend 5 hours. I also did not realize how relatively recently the game came out. If it had come out as part of one of the earlier Xbox Summers of Arcade, I might have even considered 100%ing it. The Shadow Complex comparison is interesting, because that's another game I was definitely getting those vibes. If people don't know, Shadow Complex was a Epic Games made Metroidvania that, again, was using a lot of 3D assets. Kind of similar to this, maybe a bit more on the Super Metroid side of things, especially with the guns and whatnot. Randy, did you have something to throw in there?
I love Shadow Complex. It was also kind of funny because I think Orson Scott Card had something to do with the story of that game, and Nolan North voices the character in that game, which is just, man.
It was right.
It was just a weird thing.
It was like right after Uncharted 1 came out. I was like, oh, this guy, and he even looked like Nathan Drake. I was like, oh yeah, wow, hey, we all know that guy's voice now.
Yeah, it was like Assassin's Creed, Uncharted, and Shadow Complex all came out.
And that Prince of Persia reboot.
And the Prince of, he was everywhere. It was insane. He just blew up in that span of a year. But I really like Shadow Complex. I do want to say they said, whoever, I'm sorry, I forget who wrote that last, Chronobound said that it was overstaying its welcome. Part of me wishes there was a little bit more, and I say that because I don't think the level design kind of reached its potential. I was thinking playing it that we had all these really cool mechanics and they don't really go the extra mile in combining them in interesting ways. I feel like if you were to play something like Celeste, they introduce a mechanic and they beat that mechanic into the ground. Like they have so many different ways to explore that mechanic, and then they give you a new one. I don't feel like they kind of reached that with Strider as much. I would have liked a little bit more.
I think that's probably right. I'll be a little Goldilocks here and say I think the length was just right, but you're definitely right, especially with those sword upgrades. Like you get the ice sword, and you don't really do very much with it. I imagine that's how you maybe get some of like the upgrades in the optional path, but you don't need it very much for the critical path. The sword upgrades in general were something where part of me is like, I see what they're trying to do here. They're almost not any more interesting than matching the color for those guys with the shield. Part of me kind of wish that they were stacking upgrades. Like, okay, now I can deflect whenever I want. Now I always can shoot out those things. Maybe I don't want to turn things to ice all the time because that's kind of annoying. Shawn, did you have a thought along those lines?
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about because I actually just finished it today because I finally had time to beat like the final section there. I was like in the run to Grandmaster Mayo. Didn't like that they went the Metroid Prime approach with the swords matching the beams in that game.
Metroid Prime, isn't it?
Yeah. Sure. Like I would have preferred that they went the 2D Metroid route where the beams do just stack, like you said, because well, the game is just designed in a way that's never an issue that you're freezing enemies before annihilating them or whatever. It's because the upgrades stack in a way where they will trump each other. Like you don't need frozen platforms once you have the screw attack. It's something that they very much designed to all the upgrades work in tandem, which is something where it didn't really feel like that was happening here. I think that's why I didn't like the way that the plasmas worked, because like you say, it basically feels like, oh, I see color, I need to match color. Like, oh, there's a door that is purple, I must switch to my purple thing and then use that to open it. Which, if on top of it not feeling like Randy was saying, like it didn't really reach the full potential that could have been there, both in terms of the upgrades and the level design working together like that. I also felt like, I should have mentioned this when we were talking about the controls, the literal controls themselves felt a little clunky to me. Like having used the D-pad to switch the different plasma and then having to like hold specifically L1 felt like an awkward choice. Like you hold L1 and then you press one of the face buttons to do your different options. Yeah, I felt like, am I forgetting something? Aren't the triggers like unused?
You hold down one of them to use the kunai, which you don't use too much. I mean, there's a lot of inputs.
Right, but you can also just press... You press B to use the kunai.
You could press B. Yeah, you're right.
Why would... Yeah, exactly. Like, why not just put, option 1 on left trigger, option 2 on right trigger? And it's also like, we have a dedicated ground pound button on Y. It felt like they almost like came up with the controls as they went with the upgrades, maybe. I don't know how we came up on this control scheme, but it felt a little overcomplicated.
Let's see what a couple more of these write-ins had to say. This is from, I'm going to say Peachon or maybe Pekin. I want to say Peachon because that sounds more weeby. I'm sorry I can't be in the call tonight, but here are my thoughts. I overall like this game. Feels so good to control, but it's so flawed on the story, characters, level design, and upgrades. Everything feels so generic and bland. One positive thing I can say is that I love the AAA vibes on the game and wish it had gotten a sequel, which expanded on the aspects that this game was lacking. Also, this is my first Game Club game, and I really like the process. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I like to hear that.
AA vibes, by the way.
What did I say?
Triple A.
I threw an extra A in there. I'm sorry. I read AA, but said the wrong thing. Thank you, Shawn. The John in the Hat says, don't have much thoughts on listening along for fun, but it was okay the little bit I played. I didn't quite love it because of the combat, so I had a hard time trying to progress. I was noticing that just in the Game Club, there's a pretty big disparity in terms of like how difficult people thought it was. Like for me, I hope this doesn't sound obnoxious, but like I thought it was like on the easier side. I was having a relatively easy time just kind of running through it. But I know some people were having a bit of a harder time kind of getting a grasp on the combat. I wonder if some people, it's something that I always know about these games, that sometimes you can just kind of run through it. You don't have to fight everything, especially if there isn't any EXP like leveling mechanics like you would have in a Castlevania, Metroidvania. Randy, do you have any kind of thoughts on that difficulty side of things?
I played it on hard and didn't really have any issues, and I'm not bragging. I just think the way
Get a load of this guy.
Yeah. Wow. Basically what I'm saying is I'm better than every one of you.
Fair.
No, I just think it could be, Mike. I think you and I grew up kind of with hard games exclusively. Like that is what we had access to, and we just kind of got used to it. And I think in this case, instead of beating my head against the wall and just doing the same thing over and over again, when I ran into a difficult spot, I said, okay, how can I change my approach and get through it? And usually second or third time, my new approach would work. And it's what made me discover like mashing super hard on the sword button would blitz through bosses very easily. And kind of that stuff builds up to the point where I reach the end and I have all of these different strategies in my back pocket that it does. And that's kind of why I think I like this game, is it kind of gives you that freedom. It's not so much learn the pattern, do the thing no, I don't think that's true. I think you can kind of find your own way through it. Yes, you have to avoid the stuff as it comes at you, but if you have a few different tools at your disposal, just enough that if your approach might be a little bit different than mine, and I thought that worked out pretty well for me. So I didn't find it too hard. I thought playing it on hard in the beginning was a little rough, but it balanced out near the end there. There were a few frustrating parts as we've talked about, but nothing too bad.
Villain, do you have a thought on kind of the difficulty route?
And it's kind of reiterating a lot of what's been said, but it does feel like you can kind of tank a lot of things, especially early on. I mean, I didn't finish the game, but you can run past a lot of enemies, or you can one-shot enemies, or you run into that like mech mini boss kind of character, and it does a slow attack, and you can just like sit there next to it, not have to really engage your mind at all, and just like x x x x x x x x x, and then you'll take 2 hits and you'll kill it, and then there's so much health everywhere that you're good to go once after you're done with that. So it's good because it's pick and play, and it's kind of like you don't have to put much thought into it, but it's also like less engaging in that way for me.
All right, everybody, I want to hear final thoughts. So everyone get in here. Kind of give me your wrap up on what you thought about Strider 2014. I think I'll say, again, I love this kind of game a lot. I like Capcom action games even quite a good bit. This does feel really good. I had a lot of fun with this. It's definitely not a top tier Metroidvania, right? I don't think anyone's going to put this up there with a Super Metroid or even like a Hollow Knight or an Ori. But I thought this was a super fun playthrough. It's one that it's a pretty easy to recommend to fans of these kind of games who probably have played all those other ones, right? Even have like gone through their Axiom versions and whatnot, and kind of like looking around, it's like, hey, Capcom made this Metroidvania in 2014 based on Strider. It's actually pretty fun. It's a pretty good playthrough. But yeah, I would like to hear from some other people here, kind of wrapping up how they feel about this one. Go ahead, Randy.
I like this game quite a bit. I think Jeff had mentioned that if this were made today, it would enter another level, and I think he's right. I think a lot of the lessons we've learned as an industry could be applied to this, and I think the concept here is really strong to mix arcade style linear action with exploration style Metroidvanias. I just don't think in its current form it quite reaches the potential that's there, but I still had a lot of fun playing it. I took advantage of the stuff that's there. A little rough around the edges that could have been polished out, given it a little bit more time. Obviously, the story stuff, it is what it is. They could have either remove it entirely, which would be a benefit to me, or made it better. But overall, I had a lot of fun with it. It was actually quite a surprise. So,
Beef, you have any final thoughts?
Wait, there we go. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I also really like this game, but I feel weird because I always, even playing this my second time, so I always go with kind of low expectations. Didn't spend much money on it. I know it's short, but I mean, it's hard to really say which almost makes it weird to recommend. It's go with low expectations. It's amazing, but it's really, if you're looking for a Metroidvania, which especially when I first played it, it was kind of before we got stuff like Ori and Metroid Dread and Bloodstain came out, because it must have been 2016, 17, right then when we didn't really get many Metroidvanias. It was so good to play this, and I loved it. And even though this time around I was a little bit more it's a little stickier, especially the movement, especially after playing better games, but I'd still highly recommend it. It's not a big commitment, and I think like Jeff said, I think it's easy for people to be I wouldn't play this unless you hear us talk about, but so you should definitely play it. I think people will love it.
Matt, any final thoughts?
A video game, and I enjoy those.
There you go. Jad in the Hat. We already read your text one here, but I don't know if you wanted to say anything else. But you're not coming on mute, so I'll come back to you. There you are. Go ahead, Jad.
All right. Yeah. So, even though I didn't get into it myself, I was still really enjoying hearing the discussion from everybody, and it made me happy that if I'd given it it made me think that if I'd given it a second chance, maybe I might get into it. But yeah, no. I still like Metroidvanias overall, but but this one just didn't stick with me as much.
I should have become a teacher. I like calling on people like this. Shawn, go ahead.
You need to be good at teaching people things in order to become a teacher.
I'm a great
First,
teacher.
I real quick before I give my closing thoughts, I remembered this was something else I wanted to discuss with the group. Did anyone else have like visibility issues with this game, like knowing what was a platform, what wasn't, like what walls you could climb on?
I think somebody brought that up in their. I think Colonel Brown brought that up in the written thing, and there was a couple times with that, like some background elements looked like they're made walls. It wasn't a huge deal to me.
Okay,
a couple times.
It became a non-issue once I realized that all platforms are actually like marked on your mini map, which is annoying to have to like glance up at your mini map like constantly, but at least that solved the issue for me eventually. Randy, did you have something on that?
The main thing I ran into is I didn't know there were sometimes walls you couldn't cling to. Then yes. I didn't know if that was something I missed or if like maybe there was a a hint somewhere that suggested what you can climb on and what you can't. But there were definitely times where I tried a few times. And I'm like, oh, I should be able to climb on that, but I can't or whatever.
Yeah. But that was a more minor annoyance. Like I said, like once you figure out that the mini map tells you everything you need to know, it's not an issue anymore. But my closing thought on this is that I think the word of the day for me on this one is uneven, where there's a lot of really cool stuff in here. Like, you know, with the controls, yeah, the movement is great. Swing the sword feels great, as it should when you're Strider Hiryu. But also, like, you know, the controls themselves a bit clunky. There's a little bit of like extra stickiness sometimes that doesn't always feel great. The difficulty swings a little bit back and forth. Like I said, I just felt annoyed. It wasn't really a hindrance. Yeah, I just felt annoyed, like taking bullets to the face because I didn't like want to go all the way on my way to avoid them. But then, like the boss fights some are difficult, some aren't. Like most of them aren't really. And like Mike, you were saying, once you get more mobility options, yeah, you can just fly through it, and that's what I did. Once I had the dash, yeah, I was just the combat isn't an issue if you just move over the enemies, you know. But I think the length is actually what solidifies it for me as a solid game. Because if it were any longer than this, I think my gripes would have been a little more noticeable since they would have been strung out a bit. But because the game's only like 5 hours long, like my in-game time was like 4 hours, it's like, well, nothing really ever sticks around long enough for you to be super annoyed with it. So I think at the end of the day, like I was saying at the top, it becomes like this indie level production from that 360 era. You know, all these AAA companies they saw the market and they're like, okay, how can we get a game in that market? And this was the answer for a lot of companies like Capcom or like Konami with their WiiWare stuff and things. You just put out a $20 title that a smaller team made and just give it to the people, see what happens. Like, it's the kind of thing where people like myself, like ironically with Capcom games, like with their fighting games, we're like, give us a new Darkstalkers or a new Power Stone, a new Rival Schools. That is just like, you know, a $30 game that just has a versus mode. Just give us the core of what we want. That's what this game was from that era. And so I think despite some gripes with it, because it is this like smaller, indie-ish, lower price, shorter package, I think it comes off as like a fun curiosity more than anything else. It's rough around the edges, it has some unevenness. But when I was done with it, I was like, you know, despite the issues, I think it was a fun time. So overall, I enjoyed it.
Villain, how about you? Last words, last thoughts?
My dog ate my homework.
Fair enough.
No, actually, yeah, I think it's a perfect Steam sale game for the Steam Deck. You're in and out, like you pick it up immediately. It feels good immediately, leaves a strong early impression, and you get to kind of breeze through it. You're done pretty quickly, but you know you can play as long as you want because you get it pretty cheap. But I think my takeaway from this conversation and playing the game is that maybe I should replay The Messenger because that game has so many good things going for it, and it's kind of got some similar vibes.
And Messenger is on the Switch, which and apparently this game isn't, which is strange. How just port this one to the Switch, make it a quick buck that way, you would think. But good Steam Deck game, and it's a game that's pretty much always on sale at some point or another on Steam. It feels like. So you can get this one cheap whenever you feel like tackling it. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining me for this edition of the Game Mess Game Club. I had a lot of fun with this one. I had a lot of fun talking with you all about it. we already have a game for January. It is the Resident Evil 1 remake. So I will be streaming that soon. I am doing a Jill route for sure. Part of me kind of wants to, after beating it, maybe check out that PlayStation 1 original for funsies. Because I don't know. I have some PlayStation 1 nostalgia going through my veins right now, so that might be interesting. But yeah, so that's something to look forward to. We'll have that discussion hopefully at the normal time. We had to delay this one a little because of the holiday, so hopefully at the end of the month we'll be talking Resident Evil 1. Thanks again, everyone. You all have a good one. We'll see you next month. They're slightly less than that. Bye.